Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you here. There's a lot of pieces here actually this morning that will be here for a relatively short amount of time that are here that are normally in the private collection in Nadine's home and some of the boys' homes that are actually here right now but only temporarily. So you're going to have an opportunity to see some works that ordinarily the general public coming in here to take a tour from day to day don't see. So you've got a unique opportunity, so to speak, to be able to see some pieces. They're all marked actually by a particular plaque that will state on there that it's celebrating the 25th anniversary of this collection here. So take time and to really make the effort to look at some of those pieces, and it'll be well worth your time. Well, we're just going to kind of do a walkthrough. My plan is to just sort of touch on certain things that are in the collection here, and I want to thank the Basha family and Tammy Fontaine and all those others that are working with us today to make this happen, and Brad's efforts toward that too is really, I think, a great opportunity for all you guys that were able to come out this morning to do that. So we're going to take sort of a circuitous route, so hang with me. You'll be able to hear me even if you're not up close, because they've got me mic'd, as you already know. So we're going to start out going through here, wrap around. I want to touch on some things that are important to me personally as we begin this tour, and then we'll go from there. So we're going to go this direction. As you start to pass through this area, you're going to see Roy Anderson's work and some of John Coleman's sculptures, two very great CA artists. Roy's no longer a member of the group, but he was for a number of years, was a great member for us. John Coleman just went emeritus CA just within the past year, and we hate that, but we understand that. He's very busy and focused and felt like it was time for him to go to emeritus status. But he's still a part of us. He's still coming and going and doing with us, so we're happy about that. As you come on through, over to your right, you're going to see works by Ken Riley and Don Crowley. Ken unfortunately passed away just a couple of years ago. One thing I wanted to say about Ken Riley, Ken for me was just such a wonderful person. First of all, he was what everyone would consider a true gentleman. If you ever knew Ken and had conversations with Ken, you had an immediate bond with him. He was so open to talking with folks, just a great guy. But he was also one of the most creative CA artists probably that have ever been in the group. His design capabilities, his subtle use of color and paint and texture. And there's a piece in here that for me is one of his favorite pieces, and I wanted to point it out as you come through, and it's called Camelot. And it's this piece, the second to the right here. As you come through, make sure you take a look at that. And also down below that, a very striking painting that is primarily red. And who can pull that off? You know, but Ken Riley, with his technique and style, was able to do that. And that's a unique ability. Don Crowley was he was an illustrator that turned fine artist, and he was absolutely incredible with using graphite, with pencils, and some of the things you've seen through the years that you wouldn't have known that Don Crowley did, some of which was, magazines, etc., illustrations, were these incredibly photographic, almost looking drawings that Don did. So you can take a look at Don as you come through. Most of you who know me know my history pretty well, I'm sure, and I wanted to point out these works are by Jim Boren, or James Boren, or one of the earlier actually CA members. Jim was actually the first director of the national, well, back then the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, now the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. Jim was an incredible watercolorist, but when the CA had their first show was at the museum in Oklahoma City. Jim was the director, and then later on, just a few years later, was actually accepted into CAA as an artist. So he worked with the group both as with the hat of a director on, and then also became an important part of the group. These are some great examples of what Jim, I tell you, I've never seen anyone that was able to create the palette of colors and maybe more importantly, the values that you find in a Jim Boren transparent watercolor. He was so good at what he did with that medium. He was good with oils and pastels, charcoal. He did all those things, won awards with all those things. But he won I don't know how many awards over the years with his watercolor paintings. And these are some really great examples of what he was able to do. And for me, he was my mentor. So he always has a special part in my heart. And Mary Ellen, his dear wife, I called her Mama Mary. And my kids called Jim, Papa Jim, and her Mama Mary. They were their grandchildren because they never had their own grandchildren. Anyway, Mary Ellen is still with us. She's 93 years old now. Matter of fact, last week Bruce Green, who you see works by here, we teach a workshop. We just had our 26th workshop in a row, annual workshop, so we've been doing it a while. And Mary Ellen, Punky Penberthy here, a dear friend from Clifton, organizes that workshop. Well, Mary Ellen followed Punky out there, drove herself out there to our workshop to attend and just to say hello to all of us that were there. This is, as I said, Bruce Green, my dear friend from Clifton, it has this wall here. So take a look at his work as well as we move through to the next section. As you come around, you'll start to see it before you even make the corner, some works on the wall on the perimeter of the gallery here by Melvin Warren. Melvin Warren moved to Clifton, Texas about the same time that Jim Boren did while I was still in high school there in Clifton. I grew up in Clifton, Texas, and was so blessed by the fact that all of a sudden these two wonderful professional artists, members of the Cowboy Artists of America, moved to my hometown. You know, what were the odds of that happening? But I feel very blessed by the fact that that happened. It set me on the course and on the path that I'm still on now, and I'm so thankful for that. Melvin Warren, for me, was one of the greatest oil painters in the country. As you can see as you look at his work, some of the things that I really find attractive about Melvin's work is he had his grays, his mid-range values and his colorations within those values, the grays that we talk in artist terms of values and chroma, were just gorgeous. And so many guys lose a painting in the grays. And so Melvin's work, they were soft, the edges were wonderful. He would have these nice hard edges in very strategic places, and then all these wonderfully soft edges to lead you around and let you enjoy. And soft edges like that actually create some atmosphere about a painting. I try to use that technique in what I do as well, and Melvin was just fantastic at it. He was probably best known for his snow paintings and his night paintings. He was very good at nocturnals, and some of the most famous paintings that Melvin did were one of those two types of paintings. So and this is a wonderful, wonderful collection of his work. Eddie really had a great eye for art. And while we're standing here, okay, CA history. CA was the founders. 1965, they met in a little tavern, Oak Creek Tavern in Sedona, Arizona. Three of them had been in a cattle roundup down in Sonora, Mexico prior to that. Well, they wanted to form an organization of artists for this genre of work, representational Western American work. And they did. They got together a few days later. The first ones that were together were Joe Baylor, George Phippen, Charlie Dye, and John Hampton. The ones that were down in Mexico were John Hampton, Charlie Dye, and Joe Baylor. Well, they met at the tavern. They said, yeah, we're going to do this. You know, 1965. A few days later, they met again in Charlie Dye's studio. And they also invited Fred Harmon. Do y'all remember Red Ryder comic strips way back there? Fred Harmon drew those comics, excuse me, but was also a fine artist. Those guys were the founding members of the Cowboy Artists of America. And they planned this gallery to honor that by having works by those founding members up here right as you come into the gallery. So John Hampton, you can see some of John Hampton's work here. Charlie Dye, George Phippen. George Phippen was the first president of the organization, and unfortunately he passed away in 1966. I think it was even prior to their actual first exhibition together. So a sad note there, but he was a great guy. If you've ever been to Prescott, Arizona, They have a museum there dedicated to him, and they have an annual show up there at Prescott also. So enjoy some of those. They've got such a wonderful old, for lack of a better term, flavor about them, a historical feel about them. They hearken for me back technique-wise to some of the guys that we honor in our group, Charlie Russell, Frederick Remington, especially Charlie Russell, and some of the way that Charlie Russell depicted characters in his work are really, really important to what these guys did. And then we'll take a look at Joe Baylor's work as we pass over here. Joe Baylor, and as you've already heard the story, and by the way, Jody and Monica, before you get too much further, I want you to say hello to them. They're waving down there. Jody is Joe's son, and I'm so honored to have them here today. They were here yesterday at a little talk that I gave. So thank you guys, and thanks for being here. We appreciate y'all. Joe and Eddie were dear, dear friends, and he amassed, I want you to just look at this wall, and the bronzes underneath this wall, and that's a touch of what he was able to collect from Joe. It's an astounding collection of Joe Baylor's work. I'm not going to go over each one of those. It would take us a couple of days to get through here, at least. But what a wonderfully gifted, he was actually very well trained, aside from being gifted. He was a well-trained artist. He attended University in Tulsa in their art department. Later on, he spent, I think, a year at the Art Center School of Design, which is a really famous school in Los Angeles. And so he was a very well-trained artist, and he loved the West. He was a cowboy. For those of you who didn't know Joe or the history of Joe, most of you probably do. But I'm sure you've heard the story that Joe passed away sitting in the saddle on his horse. How appropriate was that? God was like, okay, this is perfect. Time to come on home. So, yeah, what a story that is. And I tell you, Joe was one of the funniest, most infectious kind of guy. His laughter was just infectious. When he told a joke, you almost laughed more at him laughing than you did at the joke itself, because that's just how he was. He had this huge character about him. Just loved the guy. I was honored to be on trail rides with him while he was still with us. I was able to photograph, actually. I took some neat shots of him our very last trail ride that Joe was on. We were on the 4-6's Ranch in Texas, which is also very appropriate. Famous big ranch there. Joe loved it out there. And I got some great shots of him around the way that Sixes always rolls out their wagon for us, their old traditional chuck wagon. So you got the wagon out there and the wagon flying. We're all having our meals at the wagon. And Joe was there, and we're telling stories and laughing. And I've got this wonderful photograph that I shot of him while he just told a joke and he was laughing. And part of this thing, and actually I did a painting of it, and Jody owns that painting. Had it in the CA show a number of years ago, not terribly long after we lost Joe. But he was the kind of guy, okay, well, he's walking around out there and there's these beautiful springtime Texas wildflowers. Well, he just picks this little bitty flower, little yellow flower, and stuck it in his little buttonhole on his shirt. And I put that in that painting because it said a lot about who that guy was.
We're not supposed to be crying.
Okay, all right, we'll try to move past that. Anyway, great guy, just loved him to death. But yes, take the time, if you can, to really look at what he was able to accomplish. Just a portion of what he accomplished during his lifetime is in here, but a very large portion. Incredible collection of Joe Baylor's work. As you pass through this area here, you'll see some works by Jim Norton, another wonderfully gifted member of the organization, and some more bronzes by John Coleman. Both just really good artists. We're very happy to have them in the group. They've done some substantial work. Both of them have been multiple award winners during the years. Very unique styles, actually. And now, of course, you know, I'm sure you're familiar that John Coleman is beyond his bronzes, which he was so successful at, still is. But now he's become very, very successful also as a painter. He does some wonderful charcoal pencil type work, but also he started doing oil painting a few years ago and has just gone gangbusters with it. He's just such a very talented individual. And he's almost scary, actually, how good he is. So enjoy those two as you pass through. Now, on this side, you're going to see some works by, actually, Wayne Bays. There's a few works by Wayne Bays on this wall here. Excuse me. Wayne and I were voted into the CA organization the same day. Back in 1995, we both had applied for membership, and we were both voted in. I was just slightly before him, so 10 minutes. But yeah, Wayne's a great guy, good friend of mine, still a member of the organization, still producing, and just, if you've ever met Wayne, he's just an affable, wonderful man to be around. Probably one of the most spiritual men I've ever known, is Wayne Bays and his whole family. He's a great guy. Gary Carter was a member of the organization a number of years as an active member. He's gone emeritus status now also. Lives up in West Yellowstone in Montana. A great artist, does a lot of historically oriented work, has done a lot of cavalry type work actually in his work, or combinations of Native American and cavalrymen. So enjoy that too. I know you don't have time to really stop as we're walking through on this talk to really stop and study these, but hopefully you'll be able to take some time when we're through with this part to come back through. If you see something that you really want to stop and study, feel free to do that and come back through and really take a look at these pieces. These works here that are in this little pass-through area here are, whose bronze is that? Is that a Moyer's? It's bronze, okay. That's a nice little bronze. On the walls here, you'll see John Moyer's work. Great painter. While he was in the organization, he's no longer with the CA. But while he was with us, my goodness gracious, he won just about every award that you could win in the group. Great painter, is very recognizable. His style is very reminiscent of a lot of what we call the Taos founders, their type, or the Taos school of painting. Very talented. He does a lot of, as you can see, large figurative kind of works, and these pieces are really great examples of what John Moyer's work and what his style is all about. So enjoy seeing those too. And then you come into the section of Howard Turpning, and that's, I'm sure, a very familiar name. Yeah, as you kind of walk this direction, these are Howard's on this green wall to your right as you pass through this area. There's also a number of bronzes below there. Grant Speed was a great member of the organization. He did a lot of these types of works that you see. These are actually really great examples of Grant Speed's work. And he kind of created, and I think he was one of the first ones that did it, to my knowledge anyway, this kind of a scenario where he'd do a head or a bust of someone, and then he'd tell a little more of the story by creating these little small figures down below there. And it was really a neat touch. Very few people had done that when Grant, he might have been the first in our genre to do that. And it added so much to the storyline of those pieces. So you got the character there, and then it told about that person with the little illustration basically that he did in bronze down there below the study of the head. So that was a great aspect of Grant's work, and I always really appreciated that. Howard Turpning, just as well known as probably anyone in the world for his artistic work. He was an illustrator and a turned fine artist, and he just blew the doors off of it. Still does, actually. Howard just turned 90 years old. And it's still, I saw him last spring. I got to attend an event at the Booth Museum in Georgia last February. And Howard, they had an exhibition, a retrospective exhibition for Howard going on at that time. He was just like he was 30 years ago. I mean, he's getting around wonderfully. He's so articulate. He and his wife Marlise, just great people, such a gentleman. If you've ever had a conversation with him, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I hope you get the opportunity at some point. Howard is not attending very many shows anymore. He's focused really the last few years on the works that he's done. Very few have gone to galleries. He was in the Autry show up until a couple of years ago. He's no longer doing that show either. He decided to stop doing shows. So I was very fortunate. I called Howard prior to our 50th anniversary show celebrating the 50 years of the Cowboy Artists of America. and asked him, because he hadn't had a piece in our show since he went emeritus status several years ago, and I asked him if he would mind, or if he had the time, to get a piece done for our 50th anniversary show. And he honored that. And that meant a lot to me for him to do that. It really, really did. And the piece came and was wonderful as usual, and was sold that night at our sale. So, great man, obviously a great artist. I can't even begin to count the number of awards he's won at the CA show and elsewhere, at the Autry show, at the Prix de West show in Oklahoma City. He's got just about every award that you can get. Very well published, and all of us as artists, he's one of those guys that all of us as artists admire. And just a very important figure, both for CA and the Western art world in general. So enjoy. These are some wonderful pieces. And again, some of these you will not be able to see again past this point, probably for a long time. Jim Reynolds was a member of CA. He was actually a member of CA twice. He was a member for a while, and he decided he wanted to test other parts of his creativity for a time, and he wanted to focus on figuratives and on landscapes. So he felt like, you know what, I need to do that outside of my membership of the organization. And so he did that. And so he left the organization for a while, and then he got to a point where he really wanted to come back in, and we voted him back in again. There's been very few where that's been the case. But Jim Reynolds is one of those. Very unique painter. He's what we call probably an artist. He has techniques that all of us really love to see, and it was very, very accomplished. You can see, and I remember this piece was a gold medal winner in '74, I believe, yeah, '74. I remember seeing it reproduced in the catalog, that it was a gold medal winner for that year. Great examples of his work here all the way through, and there's quite a collection as you walk through. This little grouping here is a really fun little grouping of head studies that it is, so take the time to see those too. Really unique style that he used on these, very illustrative almost, and at the same time almost abstracted. So take some time to take a look at those as you pass through. His color, again, it's similar to Melvin Warren, as like I said about Melvin, about his ability with grays. Jim Reynolds the same way. Look at the flavor of even like in his snow, the flavor that he created, the actual true colorations and values that are going on in those areas are just really wonderfully executed and have such a great flavor about them. And it wraps around as you go, so there's plenty to see. I do want to point out another CA member, Herb Menery, has a piece here. If you take the time to go back through, and I hope that you will, there's a lot of wonderful bronzes in this collection. Jim Reynolds' work goes all the way down to the end here, and there's some examples of his landscape work that I was mentioning early. So we're going to go through this doorway, and I'm going to point at a few others, and then we're going to get to some John Climbers that are in the collection. As you make the corner, I'll go ahead and start talking as you're coming around. You'll see works to your left by Gary Niblett, and let's see, on this wall, yes, Dave Hallback, who is another really great, well-known, transparent watercolorist with the CA. He's as Jim Boren. I mean, they sort of traded a lot of the times as to who was going to win the watercolor medal in the show. They were both really, really good at it. There's some great examples of Dave's work here. There's some wonderful Gary Niblett works. A nice one of Gary's, a very large painting that they have in the collection. There's another Herb Menery bronze over here. It's a really nice one of Herb's, a larger piece that Herb did. So take a look at that as well. Now on this side, we start the John Clymer part of the collection. John Clymer was a great historically oriented painter. Did also some wildlife, and there's some great examples of some of his wildlife pieces in this first area that you're going to come by. John Clymer and his wife Doris were, man, they were so set on trying to make everything that John created as accurate historically as possible, including the fact that his locations for all these pieces, to tell the story that he wanted to tell, the location was really, really important to them. So they would travel. Doris, while John was painting, Doris did tons of research for it, for his ability to do what he was doing historically. But then they would get on the road together, and with all the notes that she had made and all the information she had historically, they would travel to these locations, be there in person, live that for a little while in that spot, so that he could then translate how that felt, how that looked, what could happen there into these pieces that you're going to be able to see. It's one of the largest singular collections of John Clymer's works that I'm aware of. And it is a tremendous example. Almost each one of these pieces that you'll see here today have been published in I have a John Clymer book that I keep nearby in my studio. Most of these pieces you see here are in that book, as well as others. So yeah, just wonderful work. And I want to point out a few particular pieces as we come through here and say a few things. One thing I want to say about John also, some of his paintings are incredibly complex. If you'll start to look at them, just the number of figures that he put in with some of these pieces is just astounding. And then on top of that, the horses, the teepees, the bull boats, whatever he was trying to portray, and all the detail that he put into those, even on figures way back into the work. The primary focus, the main character, is very well executed, but take a look at how well he executed all the other stuff going on in that painting. He was just tremendously talented at being able to do that. And as you come through that area, it continues on. Each time I come in here, I'm just astounded at these works, the overall collection, and then how many they have of certain artists like John. It's just quite an amazing collection. Those main characters that are dancing together there, they're in a winter camp here. You can kind of get touches, even though he's blockaded it to some degree with all of the skins and stuff that's hung up and all the supplies that they have. You see touches of the forest in behind them up there. So that they're in just some isolated area. They're just having a great time. They've had a little something to drink, and you know, it's cold, but they're having a good time. And I love this character. Look at this character up here in this painting. It's just a tremendous emotion to all of these guys. The guys dancing, the ones laughing, the ones clapping, the one over there that's just, you know, he's just blowing up with something. But you start studying and finding all the other little aspects of this thing. For one thing, look at how he set the lighting up in this painting and how well that worked. These guys are silhouetted against a bright background, but look how well you can see them, see their characters, see their stances, how they're moving. All of that is wonderfully executed. The whole painting is just a tremendous painting, a very famous painting that he did. And I'm just so pleased that you were able to see it here today. I'm just tickled to death for me and for you. Another very famous painting that people are familiar with, is this one right here, about Sacagawea at the Big Water. What a wonderful painting when Lewis and Clark finally reached the Pacific Ocean. And this woman, who was incredible, she carried, the whole time she was with Lewis and Clark, she served as a guide for them, among other things. And she had a young baby that she had, and carried that baby in the cradle board on her virtually the entire journey through there till they reached the Pacific Ocean and then returning. This depicts her out as anyone probably do. I mean, any one of us could have that kind of an emotional response to seeing an ocean for the first time. And she took off her moccasins and ran down the beach. I mean, it's so wonderfully created, so I just love it. As well as this is executed and how much story that says, look at the effort when you get back close to this painting that he put into all the other aspects of it. And he had to have been there to get this correct. He had to have been on this location, looked at that, felt that, all of the sound of the ocean, of seagulls flying and making the sounds that they make. And there's a remnant of a whale or whatever that had beached and that those gulls had been eating on. And you can almost don't even see it because it's behind these figures that are in the boat back here in the background. And all of those gulls and those birds that are flying back in that area. And the movement that that creates as they fly and they come back and soar and return. And the figures, all these small figures, how wonderfully executed, the hints of those rock formations that go out, jut out into the ocean in that part of the country. Even the colorations that he did here to interpret that one singular moment. And that's what we do as artists. All we're giving you is 1 second in time. And in that 1 second, in that one moment, our job is to convey to you everything that we can to make you feel like you're part of that one single moment. And look at what he could do with that one single moment. Pretty incredible. Really incredible. I don't know if you all have it. A couple of years ago, to honor the CA 50th anniversary, we created a book called The Sons of Charlie Russell that I was honored to be one of the co-editors on. It has tons of great information, if you haven't read it, about all these guys that we're talking about their process, their history, their education, all of those things and their contributions, as well as the overall history of Western art and the progression of Western art in the United States and its status to this day. So if you get a chance, that's a fun read for you. I'd recommend it highly. It was written by Byron Price at the University of Oklahoma, and just a good piece. So if you get a chance, take a look at that. It'll go far beyond what I'm able to give you here today. As you come into this next space, you're going to see some examples as you enter here on both sides looking this direction, and then down this way of Bill Owen. Bill Owen was what we would probably call the consummate cowboy artist. And I say that because Bill was a sure enough real cowboy, as well as a really wonderfully talented artist. Bill passed away a few years ago, shortly after the year that our trail ride for that year. We got to spend time with him on the 4-6s at Guthrie in Texas, and a couple of months later, Bill was gone. It was such a shock to all of us that knew him and loved him as a person. As I said, Bill, you could use him in any work at all on a ranch. He knew how to do everything. He was just a great cowboy, and what he portrayed was the American cowboy. You can see that in his work as you pass through here. He was great at it. I admire his technique, his honesty in his work. He was one of these artists. I don't do this. I'm real impromptu when I paint. Bill would pre-mix almost every color that he was going to use in a painting. He would pre-plan that, pre-mix that, and he did that because for him it gave him this ability to create a great color harmony within his work, where all these colors related the way he wanted them to relate together in those works. And you can start, knowing that now, you can kind of see the evidence of that as you look how all these colors sort of interrelate. They'll have an overall warm or an oranges feel sometime throughout the painting. Others, like in this, the broad daylight, where you start to see, okay, these were the warms he wanted to use, the greens he wanted to use, and the blues he wanted to use. And he kept them all within that same limited palette, so to speak, to work together in harmony and yet break out to where he needed them to do. So that was a really neat aspect of his work, and he's sort of another member that we have currently, Tim Cox. Really liked the concept of that, and Tim Cox has been implementing that technique now the last few years as well. These are by some guy named Martin Grelle. And I'm just honored to be in this collection. They've got a pretty nice selection of what I've done through the years. Some of them were in the early years, fairly quickly after I'd gotten voted into the CA. The large piece over here to the left is called Wolves of Winter. It was a really fun painting for me to do. I really enjoy light, as you know, and trying to create the feeling of light, and that's a lot of what this painting is about, and the colorations and the snow, of course the figures. Wolves in most of the tribes in the Plains Indian culture, their scouts were called wolves. So they would send their wolves out if there was a pipe carrier or a leader of a party that wanted to know what was going on up ahead of where they were traveling. he would send those wolves out, and they would investigate to see, okay, is there, are there any other tribes out there, any enemies that we don't want to be messing with, or we want to try to avoid, or that we do want to meet and have words with, so to speak. And that's what their job was, to discover things along the trails that they were going on, to see what was ahead and what the possibilities were. And then they would report back to the party leader. He would talk to his first assistants, and they'd make those decisions based on those wolves' report as to what they were going to do next. So that's a piece that I did a number of years ago, Wolves of Winter. As far as colorations and techniques, if you'll get up close, you'll start to see some really fun stuff that was, at least was fun for me. The colors that I had involved in some of the snow and in the foreground and throughout the painting, some of the edges. I love a combination in my work, as I said before, of hard edges, soft edges to help your eye work through. And another thing that I didn't say yesterday in my talk, part of the involvement of all of you as viewers of what we do and of what I do, at least for my work, is I leave a lot of things really kind of unsaid, so to speak, within the environment of the painting, where it's really just paint, but your eye saying, that looks like that, whatever that might be. A lot of time for me, most of that's done in the landscape part of the painting, and you probably see that to be true in a lot of the artwork that you'll see here by all the artists here. But it actually involves you in the process, and that's fun for me, but it's also fun for you. So you might kind of notice that, and you'll start to see what I mean when you pass through and look at these works through here. This was a really fun piece for me. I had it at Preda West. 1999 is when I did this piece, and it was called The Price of Passage. And that was an actual thing. I mean, when they started the trail drives going up from Texas up to the railheads in Kansas, they would pass through some Indian territories, and Cheyenne, especially Southern Cheyenne, Kiowa, some of those tribes that were in those areas, they'd come up and say, hey, you're not coming through here with all these without us getting something for it. So they'd go out, they'd meet these guys, and they'd barter a little bit, and then they'd end up getting some of the cattle or whatever it was that they wanted as a price of passage through their territory. And that's what this painting is about. It was really a fun painting for me. A little short story real quick. I finished the painting, I shipped it up to be in the show in Oklahoma City at Preda West, and I got a call right before I was leaving home to go up for the show that when they got it out of the crate, they discovered that somehow something had rubbed against the front of the painting, and surprises of all surprises, it was a little wet. Shocker there. Anyway, when I get up there, yes, and unfortunately whatever had rubbed across, it had rubbed right across, and I can't remember if it was this guy or this guy, but it had sort of destroyed that part of the painting. It wasn't horrible, but it was enough damage there that I had to do something about it. So because they had called me before I left, thank goodness, I took some of my paints and brushes, etc., with me up there to do whatever I needed to do once I discovered and really got a good look at it. And they already had the show hung, okay? Well, this painting's hanging in the gallery at Preda West, and it was really not supposed to be open to the public yet. Well, I'm sitting on a stool, literally painting on this in the show, and then people start walking. So I'm like, they're saying, all right, finishing one up, are you? Anyway, it was funny. We just joked about it, but I got through it. But it was a little embarrassing to be sitting there in the gallery working on a painting. Another piece that I did, probably in the 90s, yep, 99. This was in the CA show that year. It was one of the early large figure pieces that I wanted to do. I named it Council's Over. And you can see sort of their response to that. Things did not work out trying to make a peace process happen in council. And so they're declaring, this is over, we're out of here. And what may from here. So that's the storyline behind that. It was really a fun painting for me to set up because of it's really a mass of figures overall. I broke it out just slightly and really broke it just with the front part of this horse's head over here. That's really the only thing in all these figures that is separated. And I did that just to kind of move you there, give you a little freedom to go in behind these. But I wanted to try this design of keeping all those so that closely related and have movement going, like this figure traveling backward, the one in the background where you can't even really see his horse that he's sitting on, with that bringing you back right in front of him. So it creates this movement around. But more importantly, I was trying to get the emotion on these guys' faces for that one single moment of time that was going on. A few more pieces here, and this one actually just got here from what Tammy told me earlier. I think they just got it in a few days ago. It was in one of the, in the personal collection of one of the Bashas. It's a piece that I did in the, I think 96 or so. Yep. And these are Blackfeet Indians. This, if you've been to Glacier National, my brother actually was not there, and Karen were not there long ago. It's just gorgeous country up there. I was up there a number of years ago. Did a lot of photography work, and it was one of those mornings where those clouds were at low, and yet the sun was breaking out, so you got this wonderful intermingling of light and shadow, clouds and mountains. So the landscape itself is really what drew me to doing this painting. And so that's really probably more what it's about than the figures. I just wanted to have, again, though, just something that you can relate to, figures traveling through there, so that you kind of can feel like you're going along with them on the journey. So that's a pretty significant piece actually of mine from that time period. This is a little, actually a sepia type piece that I did on paper. It's a combination of charcoal and acrylic washes that I used on this piece. Kind of a fun, little different kind of a thing for me, another emotional kind of thing. A lot of times when these rival tribes would meet each other somewhere, it wasn't just this immediate thing of going to it, you know, of going into a battle with each other. They kind of like to taunt each other sometimes. So they'd be, you know, if they had time, they didn't ride around all the time with their headdresses on. I mean, sometimes they would, if it was depending on their personal feelings about things, but most of the time they probably didn't. And that's what, if you were at the talk that I did yesterday, they had these cases with them when they were really traveling a great distance, where they brought all those items with them, and then if they had time when they got to where they were going to have a conflict with someone, they would adorn themselves how they felt spiritually they needed to do to have the most power as an individual that they could be, that they could have, to be that person, that warrior in those instances. So that's what they would do. Well, he hasn't done that, but he's got his shield, he's got his lance, and he's riding back and forth, and he's yelling at those other guys and telling, hey, bring it. You know, that's basically what he was doing. So that's what that's about. This goes back, this is the kind of subject matter, and I've done it all through the years. Occasionally I still enjoy doing this, but this harkens back to the early years of what was closest to me when I began doing what I do as an artist. Old Texas houses and barns and cowboys and horses, all those things were really attractive to me, and it was the influence of Jim Bourne and Melvin Warren in my life. They did a lot of those things, so it was a really natural thing for me to want to lean that way too, because I grew up there, and those things were most familiar to me, and so I wanted to show what I was familiar with in the work that I did. So that's an example of that. Now, we're not going to journey back through this area, but I really would encourage you to go through it after we get through with the talk. There's some great pieces back there. There's a lot of smaller pieces, and one thing in particular that I'd really love for you to go take a look at when you get a chance. There's some illustrated letters from Joe Baylor to Eddie Basha. And if you've ever seen or been familiar with Charlie Russell and all of what he did that same kind of thing back then. The letters that are just incredibly illustrated, mostly fun stuff. He loved to do Christmas greetings in that fashion, where Charlie Russell would have reindeer and Santa landing, you know, by some rancher's house or whatever, those kind of things. But Joe did that also, and there's a great whole section of illustrated letters that Joe sent to Eddie, and you really should see those when you get a chance. They're just really wonderfully done. And there's also a lot of drawings and smaller pieces in here. There's a Howard Turpinning charcoal that's just fabulous. A Roy Anderson sepia charcoal drawing right there that's also very well done. Another member of the CA that's also gone emeritus and had most of the examples in the collection of his work, Harley Brown, a wonderful pastel artist, and there's a great selection of what Harley has done there also. As you start into this area, you'll see works on this wall that you see first by Ray Swanson. Ray was a CA artist for a number of years, a really important part of the group. He focused on the tribes here primarily in Arizona, the Navajo, the Hopi, and man, was he so wonderful with the execution of those things. They were so colorful. Like in this example here, this really tall vertical, those blankets that they wore, that they actually create in part of the country. The faces, the technique that he used on all those are really, really nice. He won a number of awards for his work, both in oil and watercolor in the years that he was a member. He passed away several years ago, and his family honors him and CA by each year. They still present a Ray Swanson Award at our annual show in October. That award is for and daughter Pam, his daughter Pam, and other members of the family, when they can, come to the show and they walk through that show and they try to discover the work in the show that tells a story the best, basically, in the show, is an example of that. And they pick one single piece out of the show for that. Jason Scholl, sculptor, great friend of mine and sculptor, member of the CA, won that award at our show in October last month. But the award itself is that actually it's a piece of all the stuff that Ray collected and had in his studio with him when he was working. I won it a number of years ago, and we've got this wonderful little knife sheath, a beaded knife sheath that's a Blackfoot knife sheath, and it's just spectacular. I'm so proud to have that in my studio now. So he was a great guy, beyond being a great artist. We all just loved him to death and miss him. On this side, as you start in through this passage here, and it does get a little narrow, so I'll try to move slowly but still stay out of y'all's way. Tom Lovell was another, like John Clymer. Tom Lovell was a great historian, a great teller of tales of history. And if you come through here, one technique that some of those guys that were illustrated that became fine artists did, or the technique that they used, they would do a full-size charcoal drawing of what was going to be an oil painting. And then they would transfer by using whatever fashion. Normally it'd be a piece of graphite paper that they behind that, and then they'd trace that off onto their canvas at scale. That's why they completed these the way that they did. But you can look at how much work. They've got some wonderful, wonderful examples in this collection of Tom's preparatory work, both some little thumbnails that he did, but also these scale accurate drawings that he would create and then do the oil paintings. And you'll recognize a number of them. And fortunately, they have some of the drawings that go along, and they have the oil painting as well. So you'll see that direct relationship between those drawings becoming the oil painting that he did from them. So you can take a look at that as you come through here as well, and we're going to wrap through this direction. So sometimes he would alter them, but you can see how closely related everything worked out between his drawing and his finished product. Also, while you're coming through, Mel Lawson, another great member of the organization, wonderful sculptor, talented individual in multiple ways. Actually, he was a fabulous horse trainer early on, one of the best horse trainers in the country. And then from there, he decided he wanted to become an artist, and he started sculpting. Became an award-winning sculptor, very talented at it. Later on, he decided, you know what, I'm really interested in rawhide braiding. So he became very accomplished at that too. He's actually the only member of both the Cowboy Artists of America. He's emeritus now, but he's the only still active or emeritus member of Cowboy Artists of America, an active member of the people that we share our show each year with, the traditional Cowboy Artists of America, who we share the space during our show in October with those guys, and he was accepted into that organization as well with what he can do with rawhide braiding. So he's quite an accomplished individual, period. As you weave through here, another historically oriented artist for the organization was Harvey Johnson, along the lines of Tom Lovell, John Clymer. He did this kind of work. He loved mountain man subject matter. You can see a lot of that work from Harvey, and these are great examples of what he was able to do. As you come on around from there, you'll see a few more of his. In the corner, sculpture by Fritz White, another really talented, very, very creative sculptor that we had. He passed away a number of years ago. Fritz actually was another artist that moved to Bosque County, there where I live at one point, stayed a few years, and then relocated back up to Colorado. As you pass through, there's more Tom Lovell's illustrating the same kinds of things that we've already spoken about with his preliminary drawings and his finished paintings. So you get some other great examples of that from him. And this actually too is a large collection of Tom Lovell's work all in one place. And that, for me, pretty much wraps it up. I really appreciate you all being here this morning. It's been wonderful to have you here, and thank you for being here this weekend for my show. It means a lot to me, and thanks again to everyone here at the Basha Collection for allowing us to come out and do this morning. I appreciate it very much.